day and were offered an opportunity to have some funding to open a low barrier shelter immediately.
Yeah, this is a thing that we're not used to, that almost never happens, is someone being like, we'll find the money. I think there was to have finances available to do this work when we're used to doing it just on our own time or in such a stretched volunteer capacity.
Exactly.
An opportunity that we didn't want to pass up, and the need was there. This was like an unfolding crisis, and people were just getting more and more stressed out.
Right, and it was all under the pretense that the Walmart camp there was going to be taken down. It was going to be closed. They were going to put up fencing, and they were going to remove all of the people there. We had learned that the Red Cross was actually going to go to the Silver Dollar Fairgrounds because this was before that, and open up a shelter there. So, it felt really urgent in the moment, and it felt like he asked us if we could do it, and Lauren and I had no idea how we were going to do it, but we looked at each other and said, sure, we'll try.
Yeah.
We went through a few different options, and it took us about, I think, a week to figure something out. Is that
It was
correct?
like 4 days.
It was 4 days.
Yeah.
And something else concurrent was happening in those 4 days. The Red Cross was going to remove that camp, or I'm not sure if it was the Red Cross. Some entity that I cannot understand if it was just the Red Cross or the county or Walmart. I actually am not sure where the mandate came from. But that camp was going to be removed. And displacement is traumatic for people. And in a community that does not have a funded outreach program, I felt it an obligation to the people that were living out there to have that transition away from this camp be led by outreach workers that have mental health backgrounds, that have social work backgrounds, rather than what it could have been. And so I quickly, in the 4 days that we were trying to set up the low barrier shelter, I also quickly helped with a team of people, including the Torah shelter, operate an outreach team. We actually got paid for the work that was there. And so the outreach team was a new thing as well in this community, working in that camp to give same-day access to shelter. So that's different than what would have typically happened in this community. Typically, if somebody needs shelter and it's 1 p.m. in the afternoon or 10 a.m. in the morning, you can give them the number to the shelter if it's open, or you can say show up at 5:30 or 4:30. This isn't a horrible system. People get help every day from these shelters, but it's not immediate access. And so people get lost in those hours and sometimes don't show up. And what people need is access. So what we were doing in those days were literally putting people in cars and driving them to the shelter. When the Red Cross shelter opened up at the Silver Dollar Fairgrounds, it was a promise that people at that Walmart camp would be able to just move their tents over to the Red Cross shelter, and they would be able to be there instead because it was safer, it had showers and bathrooms, it had food, and it wasn't, in the Walmart, the field next to Walmart. And so we all organized together with the outreach workers, the Torah shelter staff, multiple other people and Red Cross workers to do just that, to give rides, to make sure people's needs were met in the best way possible during this really, really traumatic experience. So I remember at the end of the first day of doing that work, we had still had no plan for that low barrier shelter. And so the original idea was we're just going to see if everybody can go to the Red Cross shelter, to the fairgrounds. But then one of our community angels, who is also a host on this radio show, Jesse Kearns, offered to check in to see if First Christian Church could be an option for this low barrier shelter. And
yeah, the idea was, so the Safe Space winter shelter, which is closing this Saturday night, so far has been our community's only low barrier shelter. And I just wanted to check in what that means and why it's important. And going back even a little bit, I can't stress enough how important that outreach piece is. I think if people see folks who have some of the signs and symptoms of displacement or poverty camped in tents in a field, they have a hard time relating to if they haven't had that experience themselves. But I just my mom was a huge promoter of hospital advocacy. If you have to go to a doctor, you always need somebody with you. I know if I'm moving, or I just have like if I have to go to the court or the DMV, like any place we go that we don't want to, when we have to face something stressful, it makes such a difference to have somebody there who can just remember information for you. This is for people who already even have a lot of support and may or may not be dealing with mental illness or physical disabilities. And a lot of the people that end up displaced and camped out have a whole menu of other issues that they're already trying to face and wrangle. So having somebody there who's just there to support, just there to say, I'm here for you. It's not perfect, but I'm not going anywhere. We're gonna be here and get through this, and whatever I can do to help, I'll do it. Can't fix everything, but to know that somebody has your back and is at least minimally looking out for you rather than trying to punish you in those situations is such a huge difference, and can literally be a lifesaver, and is the difference between people being able to make those transitions, which are so stressful, or not. And then for low barrier, the reason that the state of California and most other larger bodies have adopted low barrier as a model is because to recognize that other shelters while they provide a lot of good things for people in this community, they have not met the need. People continue to not be able to access services, and whether it's important to people to argue or decide why they got in those situations to begin with where they would need services, it doesn't really matter. Those people still need services and help. And if you want those services to be available, low barrier represents just doing what you can to get people taken care of, acknowledging the nuances and complexities and other support that's necessary to address can't happen until people just get into basic shelter, get taken care of, get out of the emergency situation. So some of the barriers that keep people out of shelters in Chico include drug testing, background checks.
Dogs.
Pets are a big one. Thanks, Gail.
I would also say a really big one is couples not being able to sleep together.
Yes, couples being separated. And then even a barrier that Safe Space still has is that we're not open all day and you're required to check in at a certain place at a certain time. And for folks where transportation is a challenge, and there may be other things that come up in the day that can keep some people away still. But there is a code of conduct that everybody agrees to at Safe Space with the acknowledgement that the whole point is it's a place where people should feel safe. So people have to agree to keep themselves and other people safe, including the volunteers. And there are some rules around property, and obviously we still have to follow state and federal laws in all the shelters. So it's still a place where people respect each other, and the space is kept safe for everybody who's there. And it's not perfect, but nowhere is. So that's low barrier. One of the original organizers of Safe Space likes to say, what did you put? Come as you are, not do as you please, which is pretty much everywhere we go.
Right. I would also add, too, that I actually think that focusing on low barrier shelter versus other kinds of shelter is a little bit abstract. I think emergency shelter is what it is. It's to shelter somebody in an emergency when there is no shelter. The Red Cross was an emergency shelter. The Red Cross was also a low barrier shelter. Yeah. There were it's in the beginning. It was. You'll hear more about that in a bit. But low barrier shelter design is the the best practice of emergency shelter, because you want to get people into shelter. Shelter is not a reward you give someone when they have changed their behavior enough to please you. Shelter is something that humans need, and humans need to not be struggling and surviving and being re-traumatized on the street. People need to be out of that space and out of that headspace to make different decisions for their lives. Otherwise, we're just making decisions in survival mode, which a lot of people, I think, after the disaster here, may be able to empathize with. How difficult it really is to make a decision for your life when you have nowhere to be at all.
Oh, yeah. I was listening to, just overheard a woman at a store the other day. Yeah, I want to say again that it feels like it's been a while, and I know news crews have left, and so there's some national attention that's gone away from what's happening, but just want to say, like, people are still struggling all over the place, and I just want to recognize that. If it feels like it's hard, if it feels like actually it's even harder now than it was when it started, I just want people to know that that's totally normal. There's still a lot of work to do, so I haven't forgotten. But yeah, I hear people all the time still talking about it, and a woman was saying that she spent one of the first nights basically on a stranger's couch. Like, her and her family just ended up at a stranger's house and slept there, and she was saying that she's like, that was the most terrifying thing I've ever done, and I wouldn't be able to do it again. Like, I don't know actually how we ended up there. I don't know why that felt like a good choice for me, but that's where we spent the first night in a car in a parking lot, and we spent the second night at a stranger's house, and she was baffled by those decisions made in survival mode.
Wow. You're listening to FM 91, KZFR Chico, listener-supported community radio for the Sacramento Valley, the foothills, and beyond. So you're listening to the Peace and Justice Center. This is Gail Kimball. I'm sitting in for Chris Nelson. And for people who are just joining us, could we start with introductions? Who are you? What kind of work do you do? What does it mean, a low barrier as opposed to a high barrier shelter? If you could give us an intro for people who are just joining in, that would be great.
Yeah, I'm Lauren Kennedy, and this is Siana Sonoquie.
Hi.
We work actually in a real big spectrum of housing. I work in real estate, community real estate, the executive director of the North Valley Housing Trust, and an organizer for Safe Space Winter Shelter, and helped with organizing and volunteering for the pop-up low barrier shelter that was a response to the campfire. And so today we wanted to give just a little bit of a timeline of what happened in housing and shelter since the campfire, and then I hope we can talk about some bigger picture issues of how housing relates to peace and social justice.
Why don't you introduce yourself, Sonia?
Hi, I'm Siana Sonoquie. I also work in a spectrum of housing and shelter areas in the community. Safe Space Winter Shelter, I am a shelter ops manager, and on the board I am an outreach director for the North Valley Housing Trust. I have been on the planning committee or the planning team for the Renewal Center with the Jesus Center. I work in homeless outreach, and I work with the Harm Reduction Coalition, the local Harm Reduction Coalition, to help reduce the risk around drug use in our community. That includes outreach with folks. So, yeah.
You're busy.
Busy? Yes. I guess. I don't know. I mean, it feels like it could be busy. I hear that from a lot of people, like, aren't you busy? But I feel like I can't, as much as this we're socialized to live in different silos, and I can't see this problem in anything but a holistic way, so I have to understand it from so many different perspectives, and that's why I think it's really important to work in so many different areas of it, because that's how the problem really is.
What's the housing trust?
We'll get to that part.
Okay.
Yeah, we'll get
What about your personal background? What made you interested in housing?
Well, we were actually going to start talking about the Red Cross shelter, pick up on what David had said, but we can get to that stuff in a little bit. Where did we just leave off? We left off with,
Low barrier
we left off,
shelters.
I
The homeless
understand.
shelter.
Yes, so a little bit back to the timeline. We had, been given this offer to have some funding to open up a low barrier shelter. We were having difficulty figuring out a location, which is always the issue.
What does that
in
mean, a
community.
low barrier?
Low barrier shelter is just what we talked about a second ago, where low barrier means increasing access to shelter, so limiting the barriers that to enter into a shelter.
So there were 100+ people camped out in various parts of Chico. The Walmart location was one of them. People were in parking lots all over the place, but just displaced. And there was no. Some forces in the city wanted them to move, but there was no place for them to go, and a lot of those people wouldn't have access to the. Besides the fact that we don't have the capacity for it, wouldn't have had access to the shelters that existed.
Right.
So the directive from the state was open up a place
That was
where people
actually
can
federal.
just go. Yeah,
It's federal, yeah.
yeah. Make a place where people can go. We had both worked with Safe Space, so we approached them first. But because Safe Space is already a 100% volunteer-run organization that starts their work in July, even though we don't open until December, they decided they didn't have the capacity to be getting ready to open their regular operations and take on another earlier shelter operation. Also, Safe Space had trouble, and continues to, was already dealing with trouble finding space for their normal operations. Some of the Safe Space doesn't have its own permanent location yet. It moves from host to host each week, and several of the hosts were opening their doors for evacuees from Paradise organizations, schools. So that's why we are closing Saturday, which is kind of heartbreakingly early for us. No matter when we close, always feels too early, and this year it's even earlier than usual. So Safe Space was not able to take that on. So we kind of had to reach out for other partners. And again, this was still a disaster situation. This was, 100+ people in the rain, neighbors and public and city and Walmart getting upset that they're there, people getting upset that they're being asked to leave, also just stressed because it's raining, they're trying to fend for themselves. We ran into one guy who, his concern was keeping this little community of people from Paradise together. He was terrified that if they were forced to move and sort of be the mercy of different sheltering options in different places, that he would not get his community back, that the sense of connection they had to the place would be gone. So it was definitely an emergency situation. We reached out to partners as quick as we could, just so there would be shelter in place for people for the 2 weeks until Safe Space opened.
Could you say how the Walmart parking lot started? It's so interesting because it seemed like it was just a grassroots organized event.
I don't know, actually. I was out of town when that happened.
I think was space. When people need space, there was a field there.
Right.
I know we have a friend who said that Walmart is known as the place where you can stay. It's where touring vans always park their vans and RVs to camp. People who travel park their #van life vehicles there to sleep in the parking lot. I think Walmart, and there's provisions. That's their whole business model, is everything you possibly need to live on is being sold there for cheap.
Right.
So it has a huge space around it.
Yeah. So on our, so when we basically were doing that outreach and moving people to the fairgrounds, Jesse Kearns offered to reach out to First Christian Church, to where we were able to actually a few days later start a pop-up shelter. And Red Cross delivered, it was rapid fire. Red Cross delivered blankets and cots, hours before the shelter was to open. We did not have the capacity to do a model like what Safe Space does, which is do intake and a bus to different places. I want to add too, at the same time as the Walmart camp was being exited or closed down, there was an area in town where people had been camping called the Triangle, and, or as Lauren calls it, international waters. It was a place between two different streets, in central Chico. And we had heard that that place was also going to get some enforcement and be closed down as well. So this pop-up shelter was a necessity. And so we worked together with that. With that money to create a 2-week shelter at this church. And it was a low barrier shelter, extremely low barriers, I would say. We didn't necessarily have the capacity to do a lot of infrastructure. A lot of this was built on trust and
we did have some funding, which was great.
Yes.
To pay staff, and we were able to start with people who had experience in sheltering and outreach, so that was great.
That was like the linchpin to me, was just basically that everybody that was involved in this already knew what to do.
Including support from the tourist shelter.
Yes, absolutely. And so North Valley Mutual Aid, which is an incredible organization, did all of the meals for 2 weeks. And we had staff on at all hours that were paid, which was incredible.
We had transportation that could go out to a few points to meet people at various times, do street outreach.
I feel like that is the big thing for me, Lauren, is that the transportation was really incredible. The tourist shelter rented a van, and we ended up being able to transport people to this shelter each night. And so I would get maybe a text from the downtown ambassadors or somebody from the Target team or from Behavioral Health Outreach saying, hey, do you have space tonight? Can we set up a meet point down at the plaza for this individual? And we were actually able to do it. And through this, because of my experience the last 3 years doing sheltering in this community, I have a sense of who are folks that really never go to shelter. And for whatever reasons. And I can tell you that at least 2 individuals out of that came to that pop-up shelter had actually never been in a shelter in Chico, despite having been homeless here for 5 years or more. And the reason that they came to this shelter was because for one of them, I know specifically, it was because we allowed a walk-in. We allowed people to walk in, and we didn't have a set curfew. So they were able to walk in and go to sleep and then wake up in the morning and help clean and leave. And that worked for this person's schedule. And, and it was great. But the pop-up shelter lasted 2 weeks.
It was 2 weeks, yeah.
Yeah.
Although, it feels like this year there's been more, I loved working with the downtown ambassadors.
Yes.
I think they really appreciated it too. I don't know that I could personally keep it up for longer than a couple weeks, but I enjoyed having the transportation available so that even like one night driving home, just spotted somebody who I recognized, so could, stop and be like, there's shelter available. Do you want to get into shelter? And could accommodate that. And for them, actually, that was one couple. She didn't, because she needed to stay with her stuff, which felt too big to move. But her partner had been, who had already suffered from dementia, was suffering from strokes, and was in bad shape.
I remember the nights he didn't show up to shelter when we got there, and Lauren would go down to the plaza and find him.
Yeah. And with help from other people who were in the shelter and having that transportation, and we were able to get him in and hopefully more stable than he would have been. We stretched to keep it open and going well for 2 weeks. And then Safe Space had to open a week later. Mm-hmm.
And we had to exit the pop-up shelter.
Yes.
And?
Yeah, so the day that we were scheduled to close the pop-up shelter happened to also be the day that Red Cross reversed their policy of sheltering anybody. They had said that they would not that their goal was to be a shelter. It wasn't their job to find out the reasons why people need shelter, where they were from, that they would stay open to accommodate the number of people who were on the street for whatever reason. They reversed that policy in one day. It was also the day that the pop-up shelter closed. And Safe Space had found out that their first host would not be available for the first week, so Safe Space was also not going to be open for another week. So there was a pretty awful day.
Yeah, if I could weigh in a little bit on the story around the Red Cross piece of that. We were doing outreach in the Red Cross shelter at that time. We had transitioned from doing outreach at the Walmart camp to doing outreach inside the Red Cross shelter at the tent pavilion, or the tent, sorry, not pavilion, the tent campground. At that point, there was a decision made to close the tent campground. And the decision was made to make room for RVs, which made sense. They were going to close another shelter in another county, and it was going to make room for that. However, the piece that did not make sense, to me anyway, was that the people at this tent campground, in order to stay at the shelter, would be required to show a piece of paper that verified their identity, that verified their residency in the burn area. So we had many people from the Walmart camp that had been living in the burn area at the time of the disaster. Their items had burned, their mail had burned. Some were precariously housed, meaning maybe they lived on someone's couch, maybe they lived in a trailer that didn't have a mailing address and they used something else. And so we had all of these people that were there that now were going to be faced with this dilemma of like, oh my gosh, I don't have the proof to get me into the next level, and they're gonna kick me out. And so there was 3 days notice, I think 4 days notice for the camp, basically saying that this tent area is going to close. We're going to open up. These are the shelter options. Of course, Safe Space was, I think, on the original shelter list, even though it wasn't open. And then you can, and if you have proof of residency in the burn area, you can go inside the Red Cross shelter. But what happened is that our outreach team worked about a 15-hour day that day in the rain, and people were exited. What I found is that the people that were exited, it wasn't really ending up to be on based on residency. It was more around mental illness and disability, because the people that were managing mental illness, managing PTSD, managing anxiety, and all of these things that day, and during this whole process, could not manage the requirements that the Red Cross was placing on them to have that proof of identity, could not maintain, behavior that seemed calm when they were being told they were going to be exited. We had worked with HUD at that moment. We had worked with many groups to try to actually make a solution for the Lowberry, a place for people to go. And there were some really, really lofty ideas when those notices went out, that we were going to be able to have a building, that we were going to be able to, this was going to be the exit plan, this was going to be the exit plan. And I can tell you from...
Meanwhile, Walmart had given the $1 billion donation to go towards Lowberry shelter. So there were... a lot of people and a lot of organizations
trying to work to make this happen. Yes, but I can also say that that while the exit plans at the beginning, when the notices went out, by the end of the week, the real place that we were exiting people was the street. We were people were having to put all of their belongings in totes. They had a deadline of 5 p.m. I believe. If they were not out by 5 p.m., they were not able to be given the exit money that is $125 when you are exited properly from the Red Cross shelter. And it was in the rain. I have memories of a girl withdrawing from opioids almost near vomiting, shaking, having to be exited. I remember
And
man.
exited is just, you're on this side of the fence that we are
exactly.
leasing. We need you to go to this other side of
Yes,
the fence.
yes.
And now our
and we're
job
going to
is
lock
done.
the gate.
Yeah.
And so, I have basically, I remember the girl that was, like I said, withdrawing from the opioid withdrawals. I remember a man, a veteran, having serious PTSD crisis, mental crisis in a tent, not wanting to come out, crying. People were crying all over. This was one of the most intense experiences I have ever been a part of in my entire life.
Yeah, that day was awful.
This was from the fairgrounds?
This is from the fairgrounds.
And the low barrier shelter. So we had about 40 plus people who were, we were closing down the pop-up shelter that had been sheltering about 40 people, and then about 100 plus people at Red Cross.
I feel like it was 100. I don't remember the number exactly. But
I feel like,
it was
I remember
100.
thinking it was about 150 people total that just, in the rain, we had to move onto the street.
Yeah.
It's like
Yeah.
Syria or something. You're listening to FM 90.1 KZFR Chico, listener-supported community radio for the Sacramento Valley, the foothills, and beyond. You're listening to the Peace and Social Justice Program. This is Gail Kimball sitting in for Chris Nelson. Peace and Social Justice is made possible by the generous contributions of KCFR supporters and by Dalmere Insurance Agency. It's a full-service independent agent and retail broker since 1948. Dalmere Insurance provides a wide range of coverage options, from home and auto insurance to farm and ranch coverage. You can reach Dalmere Insurance in Chico by calling 342-6421 and in Oroville at 533-3424 or on the web at chicoinsurance.com. Peace and Social Justice is also brought to you by Miners Foundry, presenting One Night of Queen live at the Grass Valley Veterans Memorial Building on Sunday, February 24th. Gary Mullen and the Works impersonate Queen and will be performing Bohemian Rhapsody, We Are the Champions, Crazy Little Thing Called Love, and many more songs from Queen. Tickets and details are at minersfoundry.org. And if you enjoy this program, you can go now to kzfr.org and tip this show. It's listener supported. And I am videotaping our guests, and so if you want to share the information with other people, just go to YouTube and search Gail Kimball. Alrighty, let's have Lauren and Siana carry on from here.
I'm realizing, thanks for the time check, Lauren, but I did want to say that, weigh in on that tent campground situation, that as an outreach worker in there, it was, the dilemmas we were having were like, okay, there's nowhere to exit these folks. They want to go to Lowe's, the parking lot of Lowe's. Is it ethical? Can we drop them off at the parking lot of Lowe's? Or would it make more sense to drop them off at the bus stop because it's a more public place and not a private property? And we're in the rain, none of us have eaten, and we're all just like trying to balance this entire situation, when I wished everybody could just go inside the Red Cross shelter and we could come together and find a better strategy for this. But yeah, that was December 14th, and it was a very, very intense weekend. And if anybody in the community saw more people on the street traumatized that weekend, this is why. Yeah.
And some of the struggle that started to happen, that has continued to happen, is that people start to, this probably is true for people at all levels of housing, people start to give up. The more times they get moved without adequate care or need supported, they'll give up more and more, because that every time you have to move is stressful. You can adapt to almost any situation, at least a little bit. People are just going to be looking for stability wherever they end up, and we keep having to be moved you can never get even like the tiniest bit of stability, and people get more stressed and in even worse situations.
Right, and that was a theme that kept happening inside the Red Cross shelter. Our team worked there for, I think, maybe over 10 weeks. And that was definitely something that we saw constantly. The constant moving, the constant displacement. Now the tent campground is going to close and move people in this shelter. Now people are going to move into this shelter. All the while, folks are in situations where they're trying to get access to FEMA money or, whatever resources they can, even if people had properties and have insurance covering things. The people in this shelter were elderly, mentally ill, and physically disabled. Overall, is what I felt, what I saw. And they were not able to navigate those systems well at all. And so...
the people that end up in an emergency shelter, whether it's the Red Cross or somebody else, are the people that don't have other options.
Yes,
yeah,
that don't have
don't
other
have support
options.
systems. They don't have somebody's couch to stay on that likes them well enough to put up with them for...
Right. And so, people would be getting, they would be approved for TSA assistance, which is a FEMA financial assistance for a hotel, but no hotels in Butte County were accepting it, or were, there were no rooms.
One?
I think there was one,
Yeah.
and there was very little rooms, and so people couldn't leave, the shelter, and then so some people ended up finding hotels in Redding and Gridley and other places, but then these folks are without case management when they're there, and most of these folks have doctor's appointments. People were waiting on surgeries. People were, needing their doctor's care that was in this county. I remember a father and son who got finally approved for a FEMA trailer out of county, but the son has major special needs and could not move out of county and transfer services. I could not make that choice to do that. And so what ended up happening towards the end of the shelter closing is there were 48-hour notices given to people. And they were in 3 different categories. And one of the categories was if you had received assistance but had not utilized it, had not made the move to utilize it. And it completely ignored the barriers that were in place to actually use the assistance. And so as case managers inside that shelter, we were racing Red Cross to help our people solve their housing crisis before the Red Cross would kick them out. And there were several times that we showed up the next day or especially on a Monday after the weekend, and we came to pick up, maybe we were one document away from getting this family into low-income housing in Clear Lake or in, somewhere else. And then they're gone. We can't find them, and we have no idea where they are. Whatever things are at work in our world to respond to disasters, this has to change.
Yeah. I was thinking about some of the themes that seemed similar between sort of emergency shelter work that I had already been involved in and my general impression after the fire about sort of community-wide efforts and issues. And I will say that I thought of myself as like a pretty worldly and experienced person. I thought I had a pretty high tolerance for stress. I'd done caretaking. I'd traveled solo and slept outside and been involved in community efforts. And I kind of expected that when disaster struck, that I would be pretty okay with response and kind of know what to do. And I will say that that was absolutely not true. This completely threw me for a loop. I was depressed. I was confused. I didn't know how to gather myself. I can only imagine that stress was worse for people who were even more directly impacted. And some of the things I started to notice were a thing that could change, that I feel like could have helped with the fire and can help with services for people in general, is getting used to the idea of asking how you can help and how to take care of yourself while you help. I think a lot of people wanted to pitch in. There's a sense of I got to do something, and they jumped in ways that maybe were not sustainable for them. We see this happen with, I think, sheltering services also. And then this theme of people want to offer help, but if help is not accepted in the way that they like, then that help is withdrawn. Do you feel like do you know what I'm talking about when I say that?
Yeah, I mean, I think so. I feel like I see that a lot in general. In the disaster, yeah, a little bit. I feel like I saw more people willing to just give and walk away and not know what happens to it. But I did also see people, wanting to offer help or offer assistance, but if it didn't meet their criteria of who deserves, it was basically the deserving and undeserving poor is what we were talking about.
So you know what you were describing is an institutional level of we're here to offer shelter and housing services, but only if you can jump through these certain hoops, which we haven't made an effort to understand or accommodate.
Right. And this is like, to bring it to larger issues, this you're absolutely right that this was a systemic approach and strategy, and throughout the housing crisis that we're in California, the housing crisis that we're in the country, are as a result of systemic policy that has divided communities, that has made this crisis happen, and it's just really interesting when you see it. You see the connection between the individual human moving through that system and being impacted by that system. And then you see also the system that's creating it and the people at the top that are making the choices that are going to impact the individual. It's just a really interesting place to be.
Yeah. I guess we can finish out the timeline. I don't know that we can account for everybody. That's part of the problem, is we can't account for everybody that was moved out of shelter. Just like people who had homes or were staying with other people. At this point, a lot of people have had to make choices to move on. I'm not sure to how they turned out. We have been hosting a lot of people at Safe Space for the last 7 weeks. Safe Space is going to close this Saturday.
Roughly how many people have you served?
About 60, 65.
Per night.
Per night.
Yeah.
Sorry, yes, per night.
Yeah.
Thank you.
So it rotates.
And a couple pets.
Yeah. Safe Space provides food and shelter to about 65 people per night. And it's not always the same 65, but we do have some regulars that we've seen this season and for a few years. Definitely people impacted by the fires. And I wanted to go back. I feel like with the pop-up shelter and outreach efforts, the warming shelter set up by the city for the first time, which was huge.
Warming center.
It's only sheltering the warmth. It's not providing sheltering services for people.
Right.
I am encouraged. I'll try not to be a downer about it because it always feels like it's not enough and it's too late. But I will say I'm really encouraged by the partnerships, the number of nonprofits, Crisis Care, Advocacy and Triage, North Valley Mutual Aid. These are organizations, not necessarily nonprofits. Safe Space, Torres, Jesus Center, the Target Team, and Chico PD, the Downtown Ambassadors, the city, the county. All these people are finally coming together to do these efforts. And in Safe Space this year, I do some of the communications. We had more and more outreach from medical providers and behavioral health.
Asking for beds,
Yeah, looking for places to discharge clients and get help with that. Also people who were coming out of incarceration at our local jails who didn't have other options for places to stay. So I think it's important that these shelters exist. So when people talk about people using services, I feel like it's striking that even for some of our biggest institutions, the only services available for some of their clients are a temporary volunteer-run shelter service. So I hope that the collaboration this last season means that these options are going to be expanded. I know Torres is going to 24 hours at least and is making moves towards being able to accommodate and provide shelter for more people. I did want to make sure, and we'll probably say it again at the end, because Safe Space is closing this Saturday, we are asking for donations of sleeping bags and and blankets. The ideal blankets would be sort of lightweight but warm, like 70s style camp blankets, so that we can give to people who are not going to have another option except to sleep on the street, so that at least they have something warm. So blankets and sleeping bags.
Where would they go?
Yeah, those can be dropped off at Blackbird. Okay.
Molly, is Blackbird okay?
Those can be dropped off at Safe Space Intake, which is 1301 Broadway, between 5 and 6:30. About someone will take those. Also, you can write us, send us a message at info@safespacechico.org, or send us a message through the Facebook page, or bring them to Intake. Again, we close Saturday is our last night, so we're trying to get people what they need to stay warm, at least if they don't have a better place to stay. And then also, if you want to help, we partly depend on funding from and research from something called the Point in Time Survey. So the Point in Time Survey is an annual count of our individuals and needs that are homeless in our county. So they're going to need volunteers to do this. They're looking for volunteers right now. So look for the Point in Time Survey, and you can sign up to help that way if this is something that you want to make sure gets support in our community going forward.
How many people have they come up with in the last survey?
Last year's Point in Time was over 1,000 for Butte County.
I think it was 1,900 in Butte County, and I think it was over 1,000 in Chico, maybe?
That sounds right.
Is there anybody coordinating all these efforts?
All of these efforts?
Well, you've listed multiple organizations and nonprofits.
I would say that there's not anybody coordinating all of these efforts. However, the Point in Time Survey is coordinated by the COC, which is a...
Stands for Continuum of Care.
Yes, which is a body at the county, not at the county, a body. I don't know actually how to describe it, but it's made up of multiple service providers that weigh in and work together. So there is some places for that, but there is no one organization coordinating all of the efforts around homelessness in this community.
Is there any effort to change that?
I don't know.
I mean, there's lots of ongoing collaboration. I don't know that the ideal is having a centralized
leadership in this. Yeah.
I think as long as there's good communication between organizations, that would be the ideal. Yeah.
Well, is there like a web page or any kind of media networking device?
For what?
For the different organizations that deal with people without housing?
I would say, all of the organizations that we talked about have websites, their own specific websites. That's the thing. I mean, it's there are different organizations, there are different access points to getting information about homelessness and housing, it takes a little bit of learning and networking and meeting people and to understand the gravity and the nuances in our situation.
I generally recommend that people, again, we're closing for now, but for people who are interested in shelter in our community, I recommend that they volunteer with Safe Space and start there, just because it can be a really like a low barrier volunteer opportunity. It's very easy to show up. The work is very straightforward, and you get connected to the variety of needs that are out there and a lot of people who work in these different organizations. So if you start asking questions, you can learn more, figure out where to go. At maybe a more institutional level, we have the Greater Chico Homelessness Task Force that meets regularly, so you could attend those task force meetings and talk to a lot of people who are working on this issue, including there now are at least a couple people on the task force who are currently in homelessness or have lived experience of homelessness. I think that's an important piece of the work as well, making sure that people with the experience are given the voice and the leadership for solutions. Then the Continuum of Care is another place that has public meetings where you could go and have questions answered and hear about some of the sort of broader efforts, data collecting, funding that's available for these issues.
But I would definitely add in that I think it's very important that you balance your information out where you're getting it from with people that are experiencing homelessness currently, because that is they're the experts actually on what's happening.
That's so true. You are listening to KZFR FM, listener-supported community radio for the Sacramento Valley, the foothills, and beyond. And now we're going to hear a little promo.
You can play more music.
Or maybe we'll hear some music. Oh, wait.
He's still on.
Yeah.
I'm not sure.
While we're waiting for me to figure this out, anything else in terms of people who don't have time but want to donate?
I mean, you can donate to Safe Space on the website. You can also check out and learn about Safe Space on the website, safespacechico.org.
So sorry.
It's all right.
You got it figured out, Gail? Is there music playing now?
I'm so sorry.
Could you play a song after I'm Gonna Die by Dorothy?
Alrighty, we're back in the studio with our housing experts. What's the current status? How many people are without housing, as far as you know?
I don't know. Too many. I'll go back to dollars. I want to say first, we had this representative of a movement called Homelessness come up recently. Tiny Gray Garcia. I've personally taught some workshops on community properties. I feel like co-ownership of properties is both a wonderful way to live your life, but also makes ownership accessible to a lot of people who would otherwise not be able to own property or housing, especially in California. But I loved Tiny and her organization's approach to what they call homefulness, and it included education for all their donors. Did you catch that piece?
Yeah.
That for people who want to donate to their efforts, they require them to go to a class around the issues that they're confronting and changing with their work. I think that is a wonderful approach. We're not there yet, but maybe just listening in is a little bit of an education. I don't know. For people who want to give dollars, which are super helpful, Safe Space is one organization you can donate to. I would be remiss if I did not bring up the North Valley Housing Trust as an organization that you can donate to for more long-term housing solutions. CHAT, Chico Homeless Action Team, is a group that has been relentlessly providing sheltering and community and housing solutions for the years they've been open. Safe Space is a program that grew out of CHAT's work. Originally was run by CHAT. They currently manage, I think, over 20 houses that provide shelter to people who have transitioned out of homelessness. They're working on Simplicity Village. They've got really big plans, and they have been pulling off amazing projects for this community, so that's an organization you could donate to for housing.
Yeah, and I would like to use this opportunity to remind people that it is Black History Month, and African American communities have been some of the most impacted by discriminatory housing policy in this country. And so I would like to make a plug to donate to the Carter Black Scholars, an organization through Chico State. And you can donate to them through the gift processing FAQ page at CSU Chico. The address is a little confusing, but if you know me and you want to donate to them, which this is really important to me, we've already got a $500 pledge today for this. I will give you the address. You can also contact me and I will connect you with it, but it's www.csu-chico.edu/advancement/departments/gift-FAQ. And basically you can go onto their online form and make a donation there, because I think if we are going to restore the balance that has been imbalanced by systematic oppression and what has happened in this country, we need to start giving to communities that have not that have been impacted by such discriminatory housing policy and other awful things.
Yeah, for people who think that low barrier shelters or tiny homes or natural building is radical in housing, I wonder how they would feel about the CCNRs that existed in our area up to the 50s that specifically named, I think the language of the time was mulattoes, negroids, and mulattoes, Negroes, and Mongoloids would not be able to purchase housing in certain areas of our community. We could do hours of the literal federal policy, local policy, state actions, developer actions that specifically restricted housing from African Americans and other people of color, even until and again this I can't forget that these are truly radical housing policies that have been used to create some of the most of the housing crisis that we're in, by putting all of the power and money of development and community planning into just a few hands. If it feels tough to relate to the policies that I just mentioned, I always remind people too that even until the 70s, women couldn't sign for home loans themselves. They had to have a male relative or husband present. So I feel like when it comes to radical housing and dangerous ideas, the history of how housing policy has been shaped stands out to me more than some of the solutions that we're working on currently.
Absolutely.
I'd also like to add, I had a tour of Chico State's food pantry yesterday, and they are accepting donations. A lot of us have fruit trees that are going bananas or oranges or grapefruits or whatever kind of trees. So they would love donations of that fruit or any other kind of food. And when I was in there were lots of students taking advantage of the food.
Thank you. I also really liked that fruit tree joke. Not going bananas or grapefruit.
Yeah. Lauren, we don't have a ton of time left, and gosh, my adrenaline is up, and I feel like I'm a little stressed out just reliving what I experienced at the Red Cross shelter and what we've been experiencing over the past 3 months. But I think that there is some positivity happening as well. Like you mentioned, I feel like we have agitated and shifted power in certain areas to open the future for something new. I also think there are things that are actually working in this community. We can talk all we want about how we have a broken service provider system, or we aren't doing it right, but actually we are. There are plenty of things being done right. There are plenty of programs in this community that every day people are in these programs and in these shelters and getting their, solving their housing crisis. What we need is more of it. Through the warming center, I was able to, I helped organize some volunteers to help transport, and also helped the shelters got together and provided nightly numbers, and it gave us a picture of how many people are in shelter and actually how many beds we have. We didn't get them from Catalyst because they have more privacy around domestic violence, but from the Safe Space, the Tourist Shelter, and the Jesus Center, my guess, don't quote me on it, but I think that we were at 229 total beds in this community. And we know that that is not enough. During the nights of the warming shelter or warming center, those numbers, those beds were mostly full, save one or two. One of the nights it was over 7. So, I mean, these beds are getting used.
Yeah.
People are in these programs, and people are exiting housing. I remember when the Sabbath House told me that they were down, had some open beds, and that sounds like a bad thing. It was because they had exited people into their housing program. So this is a good thing.
Yeah.
So I don't want I don't want us to lose sight of that what we need to do is expand what is working in this community.
Yeah.
Rather than invent new things.
Right.
What about people who are living in their cars?
They need to. That's not a place meant for human habitation. I mean,
Especially with kids.
There are many people living in their cars, especially since the campfire. I know of a probably 74-year-old woman, I think maybe she is, who is a campfire evacuee. She had property up in, she has property, but no structure on her property up in Paradise, and is currently living in a small car throughout Chico right now. I know many people, what we're hearing, which whoever has the bandwidth in this community to go find out what's going on up in the ridge and take care of these people. There are people up there living in tents, living in cars, that are being helped by mobile kitchens and showers up there, but I feel largely their experiences are not front and center.
Yeah, these people need help too, and I think we all know our community at least well enough to know that the people who find community in Concow and Yankee Hill and Magalia and farther out are not people who want to seek the center of city life or come into city services or are even used to interacting with a lot of people. Generally, people settle in those communities because they
Prefer them.
Yeah, prefer solitude, and it's great, but it makes it real tough in recovering from disaster.
Mm-hmm. And I feel like definitely there's been, these are some of the experiences that have been kind of erased in this whole thing, and what we recently we're engaging with some organizations up in Magalia that are providing food, and they're saying that they're serving up to 600 people. Many that are living in cars and tents or makeshift fort-like shelters with tarps on top. And I at this point, I don't know who is looking into that to help.
Yeah.
An issue is that it's toxic where the burn areas are. So if they're camped out in those toxic burned over areas, that's health hazards.
Yeah, we still have a lot of problems to solve. Thank you for reminding me. There are a lot of things going well, and I definitely agree that what we need is more people working on them. This is my, I'm biased because I personally love working in housing and shelter, but I honestly think that lots of other people would love it too. Housing affects all of us, and it's something that I think has been one of many things that as a culture we've handed over to a few well-financed quote-unquote experts, but how our own housing and the housing of our community is planned and built, and who it supports and how affects all of us. And I would encourage more people to just get involved. Safe Space Winter Shelter is definitely moving towards trying to open a permanent facility with more hours. It's not there yet, but this is what's being worked on. I think most of the community knows that the Jesus Center has been working on expanding the services they can provide. Torres Shelter has been making great efforts to become a more open shelter that can accommodate more people. The city has now gotten involved. The North Valley Housing Trust was able to connect with a company that makes a product called Shift Pods, which is like a 144 square foot insulated semi-permanent tent. People can live in them for up to 3 years. They get deployed basically. It's a weird mix of clientele, but it's like upscale festivals and like emergency shelter,
Like
refugee
disasters,
camps.
yeah.
They provide the tents for like you have Red Cross and firefighters and stuff to stay in emergency zones. They provide refugee camps, but they're pretty great. We've brought a few into Chico. We hope that we can find an organization that wants to take this on. We can get a lot of them for very cheap. They're an awesome product, and they're not permanent, but again, they can be heated and cooled. You can fit a queen-size bed in there. We hope that for people whose only other option is their car, or for people who have folks who are, camped in their living room, who feel like they may just need some private space, we would love to find an organization that wants to work on helping us get more of these into town so that at least some of that stress can be taken off. The next step up for us is we at the Housing Trust are working on putting together experts and partners in ADUs, which stands for accessory dwelling units. We've heard over and over that this would be our next step in terms of actual housing in the community. This is a very quick and easy way to get 1,000+ units into the community, and there's two kinds. Conversions of spaces that are already there, like garages are building separate units, so we're at work to put together partners and simplify that process, provide education to the community so we can get as many of those units built quickly if possible. And then long-term, the Housing Trust works with big and small affordable housing developers to create more affordable housing in the community. And through that organization and through sheltering, the ask is for more people to get involved, take an interest in housing, take an interest in planning, take an interest in building. If you've got just some space in your yard or a garage you convert, you could be part of the housing solution for our area.
Could you say just a word about your personal involvement and how you got started in doing this kind of important work, each of you? But before you do, let me just read this. Peace and social justice is made possible by the generous contributions of KZFR supporters and by Burchard Construction, specializing in custom remodels, new home and commercial building, from foundation to finish work. Burchard Construction, where the homeowner's input matters, assuring a professional, reliable, and quality result. Custom construction with beauty and function. For bids and consultations, call Adam Richard at 864-5427 or visit richardconstruction.com. Peace and social justice is also made possible by Live Life Juice Company, providing fresh, locally made, organic, cold-pressed juices and elixirs, also serving vegan and gluten-free organic prepared food and soft serve. Open weekdays from 9 a.m. to 8 p.m., weekends 10 a.m. to 6 p.m. More information at livelifejuice.com, on Facebook and Instagram, and calling 566-3346. It now delivers to your home or office. Live Life Juice Company, pure, fresh juice. Drink to your health. I want to remind listeners that we are videotaping this, and the tape will be available, the video will be available on my YouTube channel. Just search Gail Kimball. So, personal involvement, what motivated you?
Personal involvement.
Siana.
Oh gosh. I mean, what motivated me? I think what motivated me is that I have always, I grew up on the margins of society. I grew up in poverty. I am a person of color. I'm Indigenous, and I I've always been somebody that has found my learning and my heart and my community at the edge of society. During my 20s and 30s, I ended up working in kind of a more corporate world, and I saw some pretty ugly things about the global economy that really freaked me out. I worked for an apparel company that made things at Walmart and made things in China, and I was visiting factories where I was seeing children pull screens and put glitter on Captain America logos, and through a culmination of events, I just decided that I wasn't going to do it anymore, and I was going to leave that industry, and I was going to work in my community, and I wanted to be around people that lived on the street. I wanted to be around people that knew that this system was not meeting fundamental human needs, and so through that I started volunteering, which turned into work.
And so who pays you now?
Multiple different organizations.
Oh, yes, multi-purposes.
Why am I personally involved in this? We've only got 4 minutes. I feel like I want to start with like my family history in Scotland, being displaced after they lost a 700-year fight for independence. My own history is just being moved around so much. But the short answer is I've always wanted to help. I don't know if that's personal or my family or culture or all of them together. I want to help. And I recognize that I was given a lot to work with and given a lot of opportunities. And I think as a person who is deeply in love with this valley and this place in California, as a person who was raised in the Bay Area in California, I felt like the biggest impact I could have was in housing and shelter. It's one of the most, a sense of safe place, a sense of connection to your place, and being safe there seems like the most fundamental human need. At least personally, I feel like until I had that, I was looking for it. And
as you suggested, it's really hard to deliver services if you don't know where the person is.
yeah,
It's like, okay, we got this ready, but whoop,
yeah.
you're gone.
Yeah, and it felt like something that it was an issue that was getting worse, and I guess in some ways just trying to take my own advice, which is there's something that I'm passionate about and interested in that I should just get involved. And also home is just very important to me. I moved around a lot as a kid. We lost our home when I was growing up. My immediate family combined lost 4 houses in the foreclosure crisis. I think just having a sense of how easily people's most fundamental need of shelter and place and home is messed with by unjust forces, or even at best indifferent forces, made me want us to have a different relationship to the places we call home.
It's precarious, and that changes your whole life.
Yeah.
Viewpoint.
Especially in California, the access to shelter is not there. The access to home and home ownership is not there, and is going away at an increasing rate for people.
Gavin Newsom talked a lot about that, the need for affordable housing. So hopefully he'll lead some changes in that direction.
Yeah, and we are. I guess, there are a lot of problems. It's easy to get bogged down on, but people are turning resources and attention and work and interest into affordable housing. I love it. This feels like great work to do. And I will say that the statistics show that homelessness is going down overall nationwide, but in all the areas with affordable housing issues and affordable housing shortage, it is going up. So pretty much every place in California is included in that.
Right. So in the minute we have left, if people want to help, what can they do?
Get involved.
Yeah, find a person that you know who's doing work. Ask them if you can join up with them. You want to find places where your skills and personality are a fit. That's why I recommend volunteering with Safe Space if possible, because you meet so many people. You can donate money to these organizations. You can honestly start. The lightest way is just not making things worse, interrupting stigma and harm being done to people on the street is one way. You can donate money. You can start attending council meetings. You can, what else?
You can you can just start to look at housing differently and your neighborhood differently, and realize that that was somebody's imagination that put it there, and you can dream up something else.
Yeah.
Great. Lauren and Siana, thank you so much. You've been listening to Peace and Justice, KZFR. It's 1 o'clock, and stay tuned for Plain Dead.